The silence in the doctor's office wasn't the kind that comforted, it was the kind that warned. Clara Wren sat motionless, her knuckles white as she gripped the edge of her seat. Dr. Myers looked at her the way people look at someone they're about to hurt. "I'm sorry, Clara," he said softly, the words sliding out like a scalpel. "It's stage 4. The cancer has metastasized." She blinked slowly, registering each syllable like a slap across the face. The ticking clock behind him was deafening in the silence that followed. "No treatment?" she asked, already knowing the answer. He shook his head but added, "There's a trial at Ashworth Institute." The room spun around her like a slow, cruel carousel she couldn't escape. Outside the hospital, the world had the audacity to be beautiful. Sunlight streamed through a sky too blue to be real, and children laughed as they passed her on the sidewalk. Clara walked like a ghost, feet barely touching the ground, a shell of the woman who'd walked in that morning. Her hands trembled as she reached for her phone, but she couldn't bring herself to call Adrian. She remembered how he'd smiled just last night, told her she was his forever. But something had shifted. There was a look in his eyes, guilt disguised as love. And the lipstick stain on his collar wasn't hers. Clara had ignored it then, brushing it off as paranoia. But now, facing death, denial had no place in her chest anymore. She drove aimlessly for hours, the city blurring around her like watercolor bleeding across a page. Eventually, her car found its way to the cliffs where she and Adrian used to watch lightning storms crash over the ocean. Wind whipped her hair across her face, but she welcomed the sting. It reminded her she was still alive. In the distance, waves shattered against jagged rocks with a fury she envied. Clara clutched her stomach as if trying to hold herself together, but grief poured out in silent sobs. She thought about telling someone, her mother, her best friend Evelyn, but the betrayal stuck in her throat like broken glass. The truth wasn't just in her diagnosis. It was in the lies that had led her here. The realization came like thunder. She didn't want pity or apologies. She wanted meaning, and she wanted to disappear on her own terms. By nightfall, she stood in front of the Ashworth Institute, its glass walls glowing like a mausoleum of hope. A receptionist in sterile white greeted her, too cheerful for what Clara was about to do. She signed the paperwork with a steady hand, though her heart thudded with uncertainty. Donating my body to research sounded like surrender, but to Clara, it felt like control. She wasn't giving up. She was deciding how her story would end. Or maybe how it might begin again. The nurse took her down cold, winding corridors until they reached a room too clean to feel real. Clara looked in the mirror one last time and barely recognized the girl with hollow eyes. She lay down without protest, swallowing her fear. And then, with the press of a syringe, everything went black. 3 weeks later, a death certificate bearing Clara Wren's name was filed quietly, with no funeral, no obituary. Adrian Vale was listed as her emergency contact, but he never responded. No one came to claim her belongings, and her apartment lease was terminated without fanfare. She was officially gone. Yet beneath the clinical depths of the Ashworth Institute, something stirred. Clara's heart beat again, slowly at first, then with growing force. Her eyelids fluttered open, and the world rushed back in a flood of pain and confusion. But this time, she wasn't fragile. She wasn't naive. Clara Wren was dead. And in her place, something colder, wiser, and far more dangerous had been born. The first thing Clara felt was the cold. Not a gentle chill, but a bone-deep iciness that wrapped around her like a second skin. Her eyes opened slowly, adjusting to sterile white lights flickering above her in rhythmic pulses. The ceiling was unfamiliar, too clean, too perfect, like the set of a movie where no one ever actually lived. Her body felt heavy, her limbs foreign, like they had been detached and reassembled by someone with shaky hands. She tried to speak, but her voice came out cracked, barely human. A machine beeped beside her, tracking her heart with clinical indifference. Tubes ran into her arms, her chest, even her spine, each one a thread connecting her to something unseen. A masked figure leaned over her, eyes sharp and gloved hands steady. "You're awake," he said calmly, as if she'd simply been sleeping. It took her days to walk again, weeks before her reflection no longer made her flinch. Her face bore faint scars now, almost invisible, but to Clara, they screamed. Her hair was shorter, coarser, dyed a deep black that suited her new shadowed presence. They told her the treatment had worked, barely, but it came with side effects. Her immune system was erratic, her nervous system remapped, her senses sharper than they should be. Dr. Elias Rowe, the lead scientist, visited her every day with notes and veiled warnings. "You survived what kills 98% of candidates," he said once, not with awe, but with concern. "But don't mistake survival for invincibility." Clara studied him with equal suspicion. Something about him was off, too polished, too in control. She smiled but didn't trust him, not yet. As the weeks passed, Clara began to remember who she used to be, and who she could never be again. She no longer cried at night, no longer felt the ache of Adrian's betrayal like a dagger. It was something deeper now. It was fuel. Each breath she took was powered by rage wrapped in restraint, her sorrow buried beneath layers of calculation. Clara wasn't broken anymore. She was forged. She began running through simulations in the Institute's rehabilitation wing, training her muscles, building herself back into something stronger. She read everything she could find: medicine, psychology, corporate strategy. The staff whispered about her behind glass panels, calling her the Phoenix patient. She didn't care. All she wanted was the world that had forgotten her to remember. One morning, Dr. Rowe handed her a discharge form with a single sentence: "You are free to go." The words felt surreal, almost comical after everything. Free? What did freedom even mean when everyone thought she was buried 6 feet under? She signed it without hesitation, choosing a new name for the record: Elena Frost. The Institute offered her a new identity, a new passport, and enough funds to vanish forever. But Clara had no intention of hiding. She packed only what she needed: documents, cash, a black coat that made her feel invisible. Before she left, she stood in front of the mirror again, this time without fear. Her old self stared back one final time, and Clara Wren whispered goodbye. Outside the Institute, the world hadn't changed, but Clara had. The sky looked the same, the city breathed the same, but she moved through it like a ghost reborn. She took a cab to the city center and watched people bustle around, unaware they shared the streets with someone returned from the dead. Her plan wasn't fully formed yet, but the seeds had been planted the moment she signed her death away. First, she'd observe, learn how Adrian lived now, who he had become without her. Then, she'd decide what he deserved. Her return wouldn't be loud, it would be surgical, precise, like cutting open an old wound and letting it bleed clean. Adrian Vale had mourned her, maybe even regretted her, but he hadn't suffered. Not yet. And Clara intended to make sure he did. Elena's first steps back into the city felt like crossing a battlefield she'd once fled. Skyscrapers loomed like silent judges, their windows reflecting a woman she barely recognized. Every familiar street corner whispered memories she tried to smother beneath her new identity. But nothing prepared her for Adrian's name flashing across the evening news: engaged to Evelyn Cross, her former best friend. The betrayal tasted bitter all over again, sharper and rawer after her resurrection. She clenched her fists, the leather of her gloves biting into her palms. This was no longer a love story, it was a war zone. Elena watched Adrian from a distance that felt both too close and impossibly far. She observed his public smiles, his careful charm, and the way Evelyn clung to him like a lifeline. Every picture, every headline chipped away at the fragile calm she fought to maintain. Her nights were restless. Elena's dreams twisted between haunting flashbacks of hospital tubes and Adrian's lies. Sometimes she awoke drenched in sweat, the echo of his laughter still ringing in her ears. She knew she had to stay focused. Emotion was a luxury she could no longer afford. She rented a small apartment in the city's underbelly, far from the glittering world Adrian inhabited. It was sparse, cold, but it was hers, a blank canvas for the woman she was becoming. She started combing through social media profiles, tracing every connection, every lie she suspected. Evelyn's smug posts grated against her nerves, a constant reminder that the world had moved on without her. But Elena wasn't ready to be a ghost anymore. She vowed that no matter what it took, Adrian would remember her, the real Clara beneath the mask. The first encounter came unexpectedly at a charity auction, an event Adrian hosted annually to bolster his public image. Elena slipped into a sleek black dress, her hair pinned back, eyes sharp beneath smoky makeup. She moved through the crowd with the grace of someone who had nothing left to lose. When Adrian's eyes finally landed on her, the world seemed to pause. He froze for a heartbeat, his charming smile faltering. "Elena Frost," he said, voice low but laced with recognition. She returned the look with ice-cold calm. "You seem surprised." Every word between them was a loaded bullet, each glance a silent accusation. Evelyn noticed too. Her smile tightened, and suspicion crept into her gaze. The night had only just begun, but the game was already changing. Elena felt the old adrenaline of confrontation rise inside her, but she stayed silent, waiting for the perfect moment. She wanted Adrian unsettled, uncertain, doubting everything he thought he knew. After the gala, she tailed him through dimly lit streets, watching the man she loved and hated stumble through his lies. He whispered promises to Evelyn that tasted like poison on Elena's tongue. She wasn't ready to reveal herself fully, not yet. First, she needed proof of his guilt, the cracks beneath his polished surface. She followed them to a hidden loft where stolen moments and whispered secrets were exchanged. Her heart clenched in betrayal's familiar grip. But this time, the Clara who cried herself to sleep was gone. Elena was watching, calculating, waiting. When she returned to her apartment, Elena found a letter slipped under the door. The handwriting was elegant, familiar, haunting. "I don't know who you are anymore, but if you want Adrian, you'll have to fight for him." The words burned into her skin like a challenge. For the first time since her resurrection, Elena felt a flicker of something dangerous. Hope. But hope was a double-edged sword, and the price of fighting might be higher than she imagined. As dawn broke over the city skyline, she realized the battle had just begun. And she was ready. The grand ballroom sparkled like a jewel, every chandelier reflecting the glittering lies beneath. Elena glided through the crowd, her every step measured and deliberate. She wore a mask, both literal and figurative, hiding scars no one was meant to see. Adrian spotted her almost immediately, his eyes locking onto hers across the sea of guests. His smile faltered, confusion flickering behind his practiced charm. "Elena?" His voice barely above a whisper, but it echoed like thunder in her chest. She nodded, voice cool and steady. "I'm here." Evelyn's gaze sharpened from across the room, suspicion turning to alarm as she followed Adrian's line of sight. The tension was palpable, thick enough to suffocate the champagne bubbles floating in crystal flukes. Everyone sensed the storm about to break. Adrian approached cautiously, his usual confidence cracked by doubt. "How did you?" he began but stopped, searching for the right words. Elena cut him off. "I'm not the woman you think I am anymore." She stepped closer, the space between them electric with unspoken history. "I'm Elena Frost now. Maybe you heard." The crowd whispered, eyes darting between the two like spectators at a duel. Evelyn's facade cracked as she stormed forward, voice sharp and accusing. "Who the hell do you think you are, crashing this party like some ghost from the past?" Elena smiled, a cold, dangerous curve. "I'm the reckoning." The room held its breath as past and present collided under the glittering chandeliers. The conversation spiraled quickly into accusations and half-truths. Adrian's anger simmered beneath his polished exterior, but his eyes betrayed vulnerability. "You left without a word," he spat. "Do you know what that did to me?" Elena laughed bitterly. "I died on paper, Adrian. You moved on, and I was erased." Evelyn pressed forward, her voice rising. "You want to play victim? You vanished when we needed you." Elena's gaze hardened. "I never vanished. I was reborn." The guests circled like vultures, drawn to the drama unfolding in their midst. A waiter spilled champagne nearby, the crystal shattering like Elena's carefully maintained control. She stepped back, letting the chaos consume them, knowing this was only the beginning. Later, behind closed doors, Elena confronted the man who haunted her dreams. "Why, Adrian?" she demanded, voice raw with betrayal and pain. "Was it me, or was it something else?" He hesitated, the perfect mask slipping for a moment. "I was scared," he confessed, "not of losing you, but of losing myself." Elena's heart twisted. She wanted to hate him, to destroy the fragile excuse he offered. But beneath his flaws, she saw the man she once loved, broken, desperate, and flawed like her. "I'm not the girl you left behind," she whispered. "And I'm not sure I want you to know me anymore." The room grew heavy with their tangled past, and the masquerade had only just begun. Elena watched from the shadows as Evelyn's smile grew tighter with every whispered rumor she planted. The city was a spiderweb of secrets, and Evelyn was weaving poison threads that threatened to strangle Elena's carefully laid plans. Each public whisper chipped away at Elena's resolve, but she refused to let the venom sink in. She knew Evelyn's game all too well, desperation disguised as control. Adrian was caught between two worlds, torn by guilt and doubt. Elena's return had rattled his perfect facade, and Evelyn feared losing her prize. But Elena was no longer the scared girl who fled. She was the storm that would shatter their illusions. At the Institute, Dr. Elias Rowe's warning echoed in her mind. Revenge has a cost. She had already paid too much, and yet she was prepared to pay more. The game was changing, and no one was safe. A clandestine meeting with an old friend revealed cracks deeper than Elena expected. Marcus, a journalist who once admired Clara's innocence, now held evidence that could ruin Adrian. He warned her about Adrian's hidden debts, risky deals, and shadowy alliances. "He's not just charming," Marcus said grimly, "he's dangerous." Elena's stomach churned with a mixture of fear and determination. The man who had broken her heart was now a kingpin tangled in his own web of lies. She had to tread carefully. One wrong move, and the past would swallow her whole. Meanwhile, Evelyn's attacks escalated to social media, framing Elena as a vindictive ghost from the past. The public's curiosity turned to suspicion, and Adrian's image began to crack. Elena realized this wasn't just a battle for love, it was survival. The Institute's sterile halls felt colder during her visits to Dr. Rowe. He delivered news cloaked in clinical detachment. The experimental treatment had unforeseen consequences. Clara's body was healing, but her mind was shifting in unpredictable ways. The transformation was not just physical but psychological, blurring lines between humanity and something else. "You're no longer just a patient," he told her. "You're a variable." Elena fought the creeping feeling of losing herself, clinging to memories of who she once was. But the Institute's shadows were growing longer, and Dr. Rowe's intentions remained murky. Was she a weapon or a miracle? The question haunted her nights and clouded her resolve. In a heated confrontation, Evelyn confronted Elena alone in a dark alley. "You think you can just walk back into his life and win?" she spat venomously. Elena smiled, calm and unshaken. "I'm not here to win, Evelyn. I'm here to finish what was broken." The words hung in the air like a challenge, a gauntlet thrown at Evelyn's feet. But Evelyn had her own secrets, hidden alliances, and whispered threats that could tip the scales. The fight between them was no longer just about love or betrayal. It was a battle for control, for power. Elena knew she had to be smarter, faster, more ruthless than ever. The line between victim and villain blurred with every encounter. The war was no longer in the open. It was a shadow war beneath the glittering city lights. That night, alone in her apartment, Elena sifted through memories and lies, piecing together the final threads of her shattered past. Adrian's betrayal was not just about Evelyn. It was tied to his desperate fight for survival in a world that demanded perfection. But what about her own choices? Had she been blind, or was she just young? Tears welled unbidden. But this time, they were not of weakness. They were a release, a cleansing fire that cleared the way for what was next. Elena folded the letter Adrian never sent, tracing the words with trembling fingers. If you want me, fight for me. She was ready to fight. But the question remained, would love or revenge be her final victory? Adrian found Elena waiting in the shadowed corner of the rooftop garden, the city lights flickering beneath them like distant stars. His breath caught when he saw her, the woman he thought dead, the ghost haunting his every decision. Why now? He demanded, voice trembling with a mixture of anger and something deeper, regret. Elena's eyes were icy pools, reflecting all the pain he'd caused. Because I need to know if the man I loved still exists beneath the lies. Silence stretched between them, thick and suffocating. Adrian's jaw clenched as memories crashed, her laughter, the stolen promises, the betrayal. I never wanted to hurt you, he whispered, voice cracking. But Elena shook her head, tears burning her eyes. You did, and I survived it. The confession hung between them like a curse. He reached out, desperate to bridge the chasm their past had carved. I was scared, he admitted, voice raw and faltering. Not of losing you, but of losing myself. Elena's laugh was bitter, a sound laced with pain and disbelief. You destroyed us because you were afraid? That's your excuse. Adrian looked away, shame flooding his features. It wasn't just fear. There were debts, enemies, things I couldn't control. The weight of his secret crushed the fragile thread of hope she'd held. I betrayed you to save everything we built, he said quietly. Elena's hands clenched into fists, the fire inside her rekindling. You didn't save anything. You burned it all down. The truth was a knife twisting deeper than she expected. As the city buzzed far below, Elena saw the man behind the mask, flawed, fragile, and broken. Her heart wrenched, torn between hate and lingering love. Do you think I can forgive that? She whispered, voice barely audible. Adrian stepped closer, desperation etched into every line of his face. No, he said, but I want to try. I need you to know that. Elena closed her eyes, the storm inside calming just enough to hear her own voice. I'm not the girl who ran away. Her words were a challenge, a promise, and a warning. I'm someone new, and this time, I decide the terms. The fragile thread of their connection stretched taut, trembling on the edge of breaking or healing. Suddenly, a sharp noise shattered the moment, footsteps approaching fast. Evelyn appeared, eyes blazing with fury and fear. This is why I can't trust either of you, she spat, voice shaking. You're both broken, selfish, and dangerous. Elena's gaze hardened, not backing down. I'm here to end the lies, Evelyn. Starting with you. Evelyn sneered. You think you're better? You're a ghost, a shadow of the past. The rooftop became a battleground of words and raw emotion. Adrian stood between them, torn and pleading for peace. But peace was the last thing Elena wanted. Not yet. The night echoed with broken promises and dangerous truths. After Evelyn stormed off, Elena and Adrian remained, breathless and battered. I don't know if we can fix this, he confessed. But I'm willing to try. Elena looked at him, searching for the man she once loved and the stranger he'd become. Then prove it, she said firmly. But don't expect me to be the same Clara who waited for you. The city lights flickered, as if holding their breath. And for the first time in a long time, so did Elena. The gala at Vale Enterprises was supposed to be a celebration of power and wealth, but tonight it felt like a powder keg waiting for a spark. Elena arrived dressed to kill, her presence a silent challenge to everyone who doubted her. Cameras flashed as she entered, capturing the tension in the air like an electric charge. Adrian stood at the center, a forced smile masking the turmoil beneath. Evelyn glared daggers from across the room, her every move calculated to provoke. Elena's eyes scanned the crowd, searching for allies and enemies alike. Whispers followed her like shadows, rumors of her resurrection fueling gossip and speculation. The air grew thick with anticipation as Elena and Adrian's gazes locked across the room. Neither spoke, but the silence was deafening, a war waging in unspoken words. Tonight, The past was not buried. It was resurrected in full blaze. Suddenly, the lights flickered and died, plunging the room into darkness. Gasps and murmurs rippled through the crowd, panic rising like wildfire. Elena's heart hammered as she realized this was no accident. It was a carefully orchestrated attack. Security scrambled, voices sharp and urgent in the chaos. In the confusion, a masked figure slipped past the crowd, moving straight toward Adrian. Elena lunged forward, grabbing his arm just as the figure struck. A flash of steel caught the dim emergency lights, and chaos exploded. Screams filled the room as guests scattered, tripping over heels and expensive suits. Elena shielded Adrian, her breath ragged with fear and fury. The attack was sudden, brutal, and personal. Whoever wanted Adrian dead wasn't going to stop. Outside, sirens wailed as police flooded the building, cordoning off the scene. Elena stood with Adrian, both shaken but alive, their shared terror forging a fragile new bond. Who would do this? Adrian asked, voice low and shaken. Elena's mind raced. Enemies, business rivals, or someone from the dark corners of the Institute. She felt the familiar chill of paranoia settling in her bones. It's not over, she warned, eyes blazing with determination. Adrian nodded, grateful and vulnerable, stripped of his public mask. For the first time, they faced danger as something more than former lovers, partners against an unseen enemy. The attack had shattered their fragile truce, but it also ignited a fierce alliance. Together, they would hunt the truth, whatever it cost. Because in this city, fire was both destruction and rebirth. But as dawn crept over the skyline, Elena received an anonymous message that chilled her blood. You're closer than you think. Trust no one. Her hands trembled, heart pounding with dread and resolve. The Institute's shadows had followed her into the light, and the war was far from over. She looked at Adrian, searching his eyes for answers she didn't find. Betrayal was a whisper now, danger a roar, and trust a fragile illusion. Elena's journey had led her here, to the edge of everything she once knew. She clenched her fists, feeling the fire within burn hotter than ever. The final battle was coming, and this time, there would be no survivors. The dawn light spilled through the cracked windows of Elena's apartment, casting long shadows over the scattered evidence of her relentless pursuit. The city was waking, but Elena felt the weight of a night spent unraveling secrets heavier than ever. Adrian sat across from her, exhaustion and vulnerability etched into his features. They were no longer enemies, no longer lovers lost, just two broken souls tangled in a web of truth and lies. Elena held the last piece of the puzzle in her hands, a confession written in Adrian's own handwriting, hidden away for years. It revealed Evelyn's betrayal, the real mastermind behind the attack, and the business schemes that threatened to destroy them all. Her breath caught as she read the raw honesty, the pain, and the desperate hope woven into every word. Adrian's eyes met hers, searching for forgiveness and a chance to rebuild. I never stopped fighting for us, he said quietly. Elena's heart shattered and mended all at once. The police arrived moments later, led by Marcus, who had risked everything to expose Evelyn's web of deceit. Elena handed over the confession, her hands steady despite the storm inside. Evelyn's arrest was swift, the public spectacle brutal but necessary. As the city buzzed with news of the scandal, Elena and Adrian faced the wreckage of their past and the uncertain promise of the future. The Institute called with mixed news. Elena's body was healing, but the changes she feared were irreversible. Yet, she refused to be a prisoner of fate. I'm more than what happened to me, she declared, strength blazing in her eyes. Adrian reached out, taking her hand, a fragile but genuine connection. Together, they faced the unknown, forged from fire and ash, ready to rebuild or fall. The past was a scar, but it no longer defined them. In the quiet moments after the chaos, Elena found herself standing on the rooftop once more, the city sprawling beneath her like a battlefield conquered. She breathed in the sharp morning air, feeling alive in a way she hadn't for years. The woman she was and the woman she had become stood side by side, stronger, wiser, unbreakable. Adrian joined her, silent but present, a testament to second chances and hard-won truths. "What now?" he asked softly. Elena smiled, the curve of her lips fierce and hopeful. "Now, we decide what kind of story this will be, redemption or ruin." Their hands intertwined, a promise forged in pain and hope. The city held its breath, watching as two broken souls dared to dream again. And in that fragile dawn, anything seemed possible. But beneath the fragile peace, Elena knew the shadows would never fully disappear. The scars she bore were reminders of battles won and lost, love given and taken. She had chosen her path, one of resilience and defiance against the darkness. The fight was far from over, but so was her story. "I'm not afraid anymore," she whispered to the wind. Adrian nodded. "Neither am I." Together, they stepped forward into the uncertain light of a new day. Their love was no longer expired. It was reborn, scarred, fierce, and unbreakable. The city waited, watching as Elena and Adrian faced whatever came next. Redemption or ruin, this time, they would choose their fate.